Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of the Vedic Conversation. For each episode, we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Derrick Yanford, a Vedic meditation teacher based in New York City, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Anthony Thompson in London and Rory Kinsella in Sydney. In this episode, we converse with our very special guest, James Brown. James is not only a friend, but a colleague in that he too is a Vedic meditation teacher. Currently living in San Francisco, James speaks to us candidly about life, love, art, marriage, being a father, and the incredible way he and his wife built their family through the adoption of their 2 boys and the challenges of being white parents of African American children in the United States. A beautiful and touching story none of us had heard before that we could have never imagined. Have a listen, but don't forget to stick around until the end where we'll share how you can become involved in the conversation. And remember, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. So for James, for the rest of our audience who might not be familiar with you, could you just take a few moments and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
A little more about myself. I'm 60. I turned 60 recently. And it's interesting because I felt this really surprising feeling that the best years of my life are ahead of me. Not physically, of course. My sons constantly remind me of how flabby I am and how out of shape I am. My 14-year-old beat me in a race the other day, and he was not gracious about it. In fact, he changed my name in his phone to Thick Daddy. So now all he has to do is say, have Siri call Thick Daddy, and his phone will call me. But I kind of feel like, I don't know, there's just so much to learn, to discover. It's a good feeling. And I was talking with a friend of mine who I went to high school with, and he said, well, then what you wanted has come true. And I said, what do you mean? And he reminded me of a story of when we had to go see our high school guidance counselor when we were juniors in high school. And I don't know if you went through those experiences, Anthony and Rory, in your Commonwealth countries. But in America, when you're a certain age, you go to a guidance counselor and you sit there in this very perfunctory pro forma meeting where they have a clipboard, and this dead-eyed person who now in retrospect must have been only 22 or 23, and I thought they were an adult, said, so what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a cool old guy. And she said, come on, man, I have to put something on the form. And I said, no, I mean, really, because there are old guys who are like, you kids, you don't know nothing. And for whatever reason, they're mad at you. And then there's other old guys who are like, you kids, you don't know nothing. It's the same observation, but one guy is amused by your presence, the other person wishes you would go away. And she goes, yeah, that's cool, but I really do have to put something on the form. And I said, lawyer. And she goes, great. And we moved on. And so, I don't know, it seems like it's come true. I think of myself as cool, and without that sort of big ego. Obviously not, no one looks to me for fashion cues or anything like that. Not cool in the way I used to measure cool, but cool in the terms of, I don't know, still engage with life, still find it funny, still find it interesting. So I guess that's where I'm at. I never expected to be a meditation teacher. I never expected to sort of follow the path that I went on. I don't make a lot of plans going forward, but I'm excited to see how it unfolds. So I guess that's something I would say about myself.
I'm curious with the discussion with the guidance counselor and saying law. Did you have any aspirations to study law too? Was that a
oh yeah
avenue?
No, that was my self-imposed programming. I was on the debate team in high school. I went on to be on the debate team for almost a year in college, and then I got into college, and of course I was surrounded by girls and alcohol and no parents, and I was like, well, this is the last thing I want to do now, is sit in a room and put evidence on 3x5 cards and prepare for my rebuttals. So I dropped that team. But I was going to be a litigator. That was my programming. I mean, in debate, the thing I really liked was cross-examination. And I've always, been fairly good with words. And because I was kind of an asshole for most of my life, I was really good at using language incisively and to cut people down and to, eviscerate their arguments. And so I thought, well, of course I'm going to be a lawyer. I mean, I'm really good at those things. And but I worked in some law firms in my later years of college and was like, oh my God, these people are horrible. No one here is having any fun. And so I didn't follow that path, and I had no idea what I wanted to do because I'd never even thought about it. I was just like lawyer. If anyone asked me, I'd be like lawyer. And then my high school English teacher, who was still one of the best teachers I've ever had in my life, one of those teachers that reminds you of how powerful a teacher can be in your life. And she said, well, my brother's in advertising. He kind of likes it. And so I'm like, okay. So I bought a trade magazine called Adweek, and I started looking in the want ads, and I started looking at job descriptions, and I said, well, I think I could do that. And so I started applying, and I got a job, and then did that for a long time. So, yeah.
And how did meditation make its way into the mix?
So I first dipped into meditation in my early 30s. I reread a book called Siddhartha. And I don't know, I went through a period where I was rereading books that I had read in high school and college, which is a great discipline, right? Some of them hold up and some of them you're like, oh, this is boring. But Siddhartha is a great book, and I put that book down. It's the one by Hermann Hesse. And I put the book down and I thought, man, what a great book. And then the next thought that occurred to me was, man, I bet more interesting women would be more interested in me if I meditated. And so, I was in my early 30s. I wasn't married. I wasn't in a relationship at that point. And so you're sort of curating your appeal. You're like, oh, maybe a couch with a linen cover, an old desk. Like I was always a very design conscious person, fashion conscious person. And so, what books do you have on your shelf? What CDs, just trying to, and I just thought that, I could have a Buddha sculpture in my bathroom, and I could have some Buddha books on the shelf, and I could say something like that. I'm going to the Zen Center this weekend. I don't know if you're into that kind of thing, but and so I leapt into Buddhism because I thought Buddha invented meditation. I literally thought there was a guy named Buddha, and I don't know if it was like a first name or a nickname or a last name, but I knew that he'd invented this thing called meditation, and I had a pretty strong and well-formed idea of what that was, even though I'd never done it. Right? You'd sit really still. I'd go to a place that would be very quiet, maybe people walking very silently. A gong could be heard in the background, maybe a rock garden. And, it's like if you have never been to Paris or Rome, you have an idea of those places. And when you get there, it's paid off, right? It looks just like you kind of imagine. A big tower in the middle, a lot of people with berets and little tiny cups of coffee. And so when I went to study meditation, all my ideas were paid off. Right? They were quiet, serene. No one high-fived anyone. No one talked loudly. We would silently sort of shuffle in, and we sat and focused and concentrated. And I tried different Zen centers of different degrees of austerity. And I gave up, convinced that I couldn't meditate. Right? I remember the moment I gave up. I was just sitting in the Zen center, and my knee was hurting, and I was worried about my girlfriend, who I was pretty sure was breaking up with me, and I was right. And I just thought, I can't do this. Like this, I felt like a fraud. Like what am I even doing here? And I quit. And I went on with my life and got to a place, and met a girl who didn't seem to care that I didn't meditate. And then we ended up getting married many years later. I think I was 42 when I got married. And then we tried having kids, and then couldn't have kids, which was its own stress-related thing, went into adoption, adopted, and then that turned our life upside down. And in the storm of that upheaval of life, and I didn't handle that pressure very well, I got my life to a place where it was really stressful and didn't, my wife didn't like me very much, and I wasn't being a good husband or a good dad. And in that sort of moment of stress and anxiety, I discovered that there was this other approach to meditation. I'd read on a friend's blog that he'd practiced this Vedic meditation. And And I asked him about it, and he says, well, it works for me. I'm like, well, you don't seem like a very spiritual guy. I was not a spiritual guy at all. He says, yeah, I'm not just a tool. It works for me. And I'm like, tell me about it. And he goes, well, I can't. I'm going fishing. But there's a talk. A teacher is giving a talk at my house. I'm letting her use my house for the weekend. You should go. And I went. And I met a woman, Amelie Graven, who you might know. She's one of our colleagues. And I liked what I heard. And that there was this other approach to meditation for householders, etc. But then I'm like, well, I don't want to drive to Silver Lake. Is there a person like closer to me? I live in Venice, and she sent me to a guy named Christian Bavacqua, and I learned with him. And the biggest thing that I think really made it work at that point in my life is I told my wife that I wanted to do it, and I said that I thought that she should do it with me. And she agreed, which was surprising because at that point in our life, I was sleeping downstairs. She was talking about divorce. And I was just trying to hang on to everything in my life. And for whatever reason, she agreed to do it. And we did it. We did the class together. And it started working. Working by means of we started feeling a little calmer, a little clarity. We could see with the clarity that meditation can provide that we were meant to stay together and work through our issues. And we have. We've now been married. This is our 19th year going on. But that's kind of how I found my way into meditation, to meet interesting women. Not, I'm sure, the Dalai Lama's motivation. And then coming back around to actually, I think, saving a relationship I had with a very interesting woman. And then following that path from there. And then becoming a teacher, all of that. So, I don't know. I just talked for a really long time, so I should probably let you guys ask another question.
That was an amazing... I had no idea that was your path at all. That's an amazing story. And feel free to share whatever you feel, how you want to feel. This is about you sharing with us. Yeah, so
that's fine.
So how long would you say you would have been practicing or trying to practice Buddhist meditation until you gave up?
A year and a half. Like, I really wanted to be cool. I just thought, and I liked a lot of the ideas of Buddhism. The practice didn't work for me. And I don't think that was a waste of time or anything, but I just, and I wasn't clearly ready. And I think maybe with a different teacher or but I long ago let go of this idea that, oh, I wish I'd done that in the past, or I wish I'd done this, So yeah, I just, about a year and a half.
And before you and your wife learned together, had she ever meditated?
Oh yeah, she'd been like she's a much more spiritual person than I am in the way that that's commonly described. Much more aware. She has, I joke that she has an intimate connection with basically every cell in her body. She's the only woman I've ever ordered before in a restaurant, right? Because we would be at a restaurant and I would look at the menu and decide what I wanted. And the waiter would come up and she would ask what seems to me like an inconsequential question, like, are the sesame seeds toasted? And he would say, oh, yes, I believe they are. And for whatever reason, that would completely cause her to reevaluate the entire, and she would be like, And of course, then the waiter would just be standing there and I'd be like, and I would do it really slowly, like, I'll have the sea bass with the chanterelles. And because, if a waiter leaves, then they're not coming back for a while. So I wanted to hold him there to give her time. So she's a very spiritual person. She's very into plants. And, she had an original copy, because she's the same age I am, of Ram Dass's Be Here Now, that had an inscription written, she got it in high school. We followed very different paths. And so she had meditated, she had done visualization, she had done gratitude stuff, but then she let all that go, and then wasn't meditating regularly when we met. But yeah, she's always been a much more, I call her a good witch. She knows about fungal ointments and potions and tonics and lotions and plants, and so.
Yeah. And the last thing for me, and then I'll let the other guys jump in because I feel like I'm monopolizing your time. But the artwork,
oh, you are.
The artwork that I see behind you is that whose
my
is
wife.
That? That's her.
That's my wife. This is a room we share. Before COVID, I had a meditation studio. She had an art studio. So now we all share this. And then funny, I really like spending time with her. And I always said, I think we should have a space together. We should have a loft space that I could teach out of and you could paint out of. And maybe we'll do that again one day. But now we're in the same basic room. And so over that one is a series of paintings called Colorblind. Both our children are African American and we're both white. And that put us in a place of like, oh shit, we didn't know we'd have to deal with any of these issues and questions and things. And it's really shifted the whole course of our life and her life. And she started a podcast about having conversations with race. And she started thinking of how it influences her art. And so she did a series of paintings in which the person is painted out. So there's just a hint of a person. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds of portraits. And so that's one of them. Gotta be honest, that's my least favorite of them. The best one is hanging over there. And it was actually selected for a show at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, which of course no one could see because it was during COVID. But yeah, and then the other one over there is hard to see. It's just, she paints a lot of bodies in motion with fabric rippling in the motion. She used to be a fashion designer. And so she's very inspired by, has a great love for fabric and how it moves on the body. And so, yeah, those are two paintings. So, yeah, if the camera was pointing this way, it would be far less interesting. It would just be my desk with like my lamp and headphones and things. So
I'm interested, James, in the red picture, the one of the fabric.
Yeah.
Where she's actually painted around the side of the canvas. Is that because she doesn't frame her work?
Yeah, they're not framed, and you can't really see, but we can in the show notes. I'll give you a link to her website. But she usually paints that image on multiple canvases of different depths. So one section of the painting will be that thick, another will be that thick, and they're bolted together in the back, which breaks up the image in a really interesting way from a planar standpoint. But then it also allows you to hang the panels apart if you want,
cool.
which can create another sort of level of tension.
So quite sculptural in a sense.
Yeah. Some of them, not all of them are that way, but many of them in that series and that movement series are that way.
Just going back to your the earlier chapters of your life when you were wanting to be a lawyer.
My militant asshole atheist phase?
If you want to call it that.
Yeah, that's what I refer to it as, yeah.
Okay. You obviously had a very inquiring mind. You had a very incisive mind, a very analytical mind. Do you find that has helped you as a teacher of Vedic meditation?
Helped isn't how I would phrase it. I think it is simply shaped. I think we all have discovered, you come out of teacher training and you want to teach everyone. And then you realize, actually, not everyone wants to learn from you. And then we all go through this process of finding out who we're teachers for, what kind of audience. I mean, I've literally had people say, they'll come to an intro talk and say, well, you present things in a way, but you're not spiritual enough for me. And I'm like, okay, but that means that I'm, spiritual enough for other people, and I resonate with other people. And so, yeah, I mean, the way I speak and the way I present things, has definitely influenced my teaching and then who I reach. And so help isn't the right way, because I think it both helps and hurts, if we look at it that way. But yeah, I have this theory that I call like the woo line. Like, there's woo-woo factor in what we do, and that everyone is on one side of a line that can be drawn pretty much anywhere on the continuum. And I became sort of aware in a very distinct way of where my woo setting was when I was teaching at Wanderlust, which is a big yoga festival that is now, of course, canceled for the last year. And they have locations and events all over the world. And I was in the presenter's tent, and I was kind of just chilling in between workshops, reading a book, and I was listening really to these two women talking, and one of them said, "So how's it going with Brad?" Meaning a relationship, I was guessing. And she says, "Oh, we're doing good, but our spirit animals are fighting." And I remember thinking, wow, like that's way wooer than I am. That's beyond my woo line. Like, so I would describe myself as semi-woo, right? Like I'm sort of semi-woo. I'm not woo-woo. I'm sort of semi-woo. I'm not absent of woo. But I just thought, oh my God, like how do you resolve that issue? Maybe there's like a spirit animal counselor who can come in and sort of, the bear and the monkey aren't getting, I don't.
That could be another business.
A whole other business, right? So, but so, Anthony, back to your question, I think that the way I present myself and the way I talk and that I use profanity and I don't do this to everyone, just places me in a certain position on the teaching continuum. And I find people who that resonates with.
I think that's one of the wonderful things about Vedic meditation and the teachers is that, we're a sort of a fruit salad, if you like, we're all sorts of different people. Mm-hmm. And if you like bananas, you can go with the bananas. And if you want to go with the guava, you can go with that.
I think that might be partially a function of the fact that we don't have an organization, right? That we don't, which is both a criticism and an opportunity, that we're not required to show a lot of Maharishi videos in our courses. Our course programs aren't scripted. There's a suggested sort of pedagogy. You should probably talk about this before you talk about that. But we're free to bring our full personage to it. I would say though that I think part of the path of becoming a teacher is allowing yourself, to do that. I mean, we all start out imitating somebody. I started out over teaching. I mean, my first year of teaching, I just was this fountain of just like a fire hose of information. Like I would overwhelm people with facts and knowledge and metaphors, and I would talk nonstop. And I think what I was really doing was convincing myself that I was actually a teacher. Because I didn't feel secure that I was a teacher of meditation. I'd gone through the training and everything, and I wanted to. But there was a part of me that's like, come on, man, you're not going to teach anyone to meditate. So I had to overteach. And it's when I realized that and started relaxing, I think I really started teaching. In fact, all the people I taught in the first year, I reached out to them and said, you really, really have to take the class again with me. You will learn so much more. I'm so much better at this now. You were my guinea pigs, and so.
But James, you don't want to put more in. You want to take some of it out.
Yeah, you want to take more of it out.
You want to erase it.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, people would. I think people would come out of my intro talks or my classes going, "Man, that guy knows a lot. What did he say to do exactly? What are we? What?" So, yeah. But then we allow ourselves to be ourselves. And I think that's a process that all teachers have to go through.
And what inspired you to become a teacher? Because I guess we all have this where we all go, this is this amazing technique. I love it myself. But then there's a point where you must go, well, hang on, I'm going to start teaching this to other people. Where was that for you?
Well, I think, so I can speak to both the moment and then the related moments and themes. Right? Because, no decision is, or people say, you just decided out of the blue. Like, no, nothing ever happens like that. I remember I had moved up to San Francisco, but 3 years after learning to meditate and finding success with it and benefiting from it and, becoming an example, the kind of person who other people are like, wow, something's happened with you. And I'm like, you learn to meditate. You should try it. And I took a job, and it was the best job on paper that I would have ever wanted. I was creative director of this very hot shop in San Francisco that was starting to make some waves in the award shows. And I was their most senior hire at that point. And I was there a year. And it just wasn't I don't know, like I was like, why aren't I enjoying this more? And you know, I wrote to a friend that I felt like I was on like a party cruise, and everyone was on the decks, like just shaking their booty and drinking margaritas, and I was in this room without a porthole. Like I just didn't feel any joy in it, and then I got fired as a result, because I wasn't doing a very good job, and and I think I just said, well, you know what, I don't want. I told myself I'm never going to take a full time job again. I'm just going to freelance because I knew I still liked that business, and I still do like that business. In fact, I still do some freelance work for brands that I care about. It's a really fun way to think and solve those problems creatively. Um, but I said I don't. I didn't want to run a department. I didn't want to be in that many meetings. I just thought I would freelance. And making that statement, I never want a full time job again, and I have not had one since. Was a way of declaring some space. And I think into that space came this idea you should be a meditation teacher. And I remember it happened when I was cleaning one of my bicycles, and this idea popped in my head. It said, you should be a meditation teacher. And I immediately was like, oh, that's stupid. Like, come on. And then it popped in again and told my wife, I've been getting these ideas about being a meditation teacher. And she said, that was funny. And then it kind of kept going a little bit. And I knew not to, I at least could hear it, right? A lot of people can't even hear that voice. I was discounting of it. I didn't just go, you're right, universe, let's go. But after it kind of nudged at me a couple times, I called my teacher and I said, I've been getting these weird ideas about being a teacher. And he said, yeah, I've been waiting for your call. And I'm like, really? That's kind of interesting. And so I embarked on this path, and I was told, well, what are the process? And well, you have to take this advanced knowledge course. And I never signed up to do the whole thing. Right? I was like, okay, I'll take this class. And then I liked it. I took the next class. And then I liked it. I took the next class. And I had to come down to LA to take them. I was living in San Francisco because there were no teachers up here. And then I was like, oh. And so I took all those classes. And then at the time, they required you to do the cities training too. So I had to start taking those. But then I started thinking, like, maybe I'll do this. So my wife and I applied at that point for teacher training, but I only committed to a month of it. At that point, they had this idea that they would create a program called meditation guides, like a lower level, like someone who could help a teacher and maybe check mantras or something. Who knows what I had this idea. And that's what I signed up for. I signed up for a month of the training. And my wife and I went to like an Exploring the Veda 7 retreat in Rishikesh. And then I was going to go. We took our young son, who we only had one kid then, and we took him with us and met Timbo and Jeff. Just met a lot of people. And then I stayed for the first month. And while I was in that process, I was like, oh, I really want to do this. And so my wife and I, over the course of a few poor reception cell conversations, and India's 12 and a half hours away. So good morning, good night. You're literally on the other side of the world. And we're having this conversation. And, I said, I think I want to stay. And she has always believed more in me than I had believed in myself. And I had made a lot of money the year before. And so I could afford to take 3 months off. And so I stayed, and she stayed with our young son, and allowed me to go through that process. And I went through that process and went through the training. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was interesting because in the middle of that, we got a call from another birth family who, because we were at that point looking to adopt a second child, and we did open adoption. So that's a process by which birth families kind of reach out to you and go, hey, we got this kid, what do you think? And that far oversimplifies it, by the way. And so we got this call, and I had to make this choice, this decision, whether I was going to abort the training, abort being a very odd word there. I was going to suspend the training to go back home and adopt this kid. And my wife and I went through this process of talking, and we talked to the birth parents. Actually, we only talked to the birth father. The birth mom wouldn't talk to us, which was a warning sign. And but made this decision that we would pass. And I remember having a conversation with the guy and just saying, we're going to pass. And he was so thankful. He said, "Thank you so much. We never, for even reaching out to us and accepting our call and considering it and talking. We never thought that anyone would want to adopt a biracial baby. And, we're so touched." And, and then she was doing another 3 weeks. And I remember I put in my calendar. So 3 weeks later, when I was in the middle of pretty high rounds, I sent him a text message saying, "Look, I know the baby's going to be born soon. Just realize you can't make a mistake. Just go with what feels right in that moment for you." And he texted back, says, "She was born yesterday. We're keeping the baby."
Wow.
And so made the right choice. I don't even know what that was an answer to the question about the process, I think, about becoming a teacher.
Yeah, but maybe let's go down that road a bit more and talk about your your experience of adoption and your experience of being a mixed race family, especially over the events of the last year. How did you all tackle that?
Well, yeah, we everyone thinks, "Oh, it's so generous of you to adopt." I go, no, 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 we didn't do this to be nice people. Like, we tried really hard to have a baby the way that it's done, and then the other way that it's done with in vitro fertilization and hormone therapy and egg harvesting. And then we went down the path of getting an egg donor, which was its own kind of interesting process, because you basically end up picking the woman who looks the most like your wife but is way younger. And we actually did get pregnant, and we were pregnant for about 4.5 months and then lost it in miscarriage, which was the worst day of my life. It's unbelievable how it just happened. But I'm like, we're never doing that again. It's just so much pain. And then, so we started looking at adoption, and, I heard about something called open adoption, which is a process by which you're encouraged to know the birth families and have contact with them. And in fact, the birth moms reach out to you generally. You put together a profile letter like, "Hi, we're James and Yvette," or "Hi, we're Bob and Mark." Hi, like couples or even single parents basically make a little ad for themselves about why they want to be parents. And birth moms contact the agencies, and they send them profile letters based on their specific situation. Like, some families are open to biracial, some families are open to this or that. And they go through and they just say, "Well, let's call these people." And so they call you, and you have a conversation and you go into it. But so the moment I heard about open adoption, I was like, that's what we're doing, because it just seemed much more humane. Because it's one of those words. It's like, before there were gay people, there were no straight people, right? So it's so before there was open adoption, there was no such thing as closed adoption. And so open adoption was an innovation, really, based on the fact that in studying families of adoption and adopted kids and adopted parents, they saw that there were some issues. And one of those issues is that if deprived of knowledge and the details of their story, like fundamental questions like, why was I adopted and who's my mom, right? That kids tended to fill in those gaps with negative ideas. I wasn't loved, I wasn't wanted, I wasn't, and then birth moms and birth dads, in many respects, had to make this choice to give the baby up for adoption, which is a horrible phrase, right? And just wonder what the hell happened. Did I make the right choice? Did I, and just tremendous shame and guilt. And open adoption just says, no, you're encouraged to be open. Tell kids their stories. Have pictures of the birth families. Meet them if you want, be close to them. And you're allowed to pick someone who has a desire to have the kind of openness that you seem to click with. And some people are more protective and other people are more open. And so the minute I heard about that, I'm like, that's what we're doing. And so we went through that process. And we were open to everything, because one of the in questions they say is, what races were you open to? And I'm like, well, I don't know, everything. And they said, well, there's one thing that you might want to consider, and that's Native American. Because in a Native American, if a child of partial or full Native American parentage, because of the way tribal law is organized, that the entire tribe, anyone from the tribe can protest the adoption and claim parentage in the name of the tribe. And we're like, well, we don't want that. So that's the only thing we weren't open to. And so, I don't know, my name's James Brown, and I don't know. So, and there's a lot of kids of different nationalities and racial mixtures, but we got contacted by an African-American woman first. And she was having a baby. We were matched to someone that we didn't end up actually adopting her baby. She was in a difficult relationship with a husband or a boyfriend. She'd already had 2 kids with him. This was their third. He was involved in drugs, both as a dealer and a user. It was a messed up situation. And she was kind of, they assured us that this was a high-risk situation. I didn't really like talking to her on the phone, but we were desperate. And I remember, we didn't put anything religious in our profile letter about God or Jesus or anything. And we even said that we're not going to pander, we're just going to be open and, state our religious views. And I remember we flew to Atlanta to meet this woman, and she wanted us to meet her mom. And so we drove down to Atlanta, to the south part of Atlanta, below by the baseball stadium. And the mom said, I just have one question for you. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And I looked at her and I went, absolutely.
And was struck
because
down
we were because we were desperate, right? You really get a sense of like what I was exactly like. No, I'm willing to lie for this. And of course, a week before the baby was born, she changed her mind. And she had lied to us, like we'd had to send her money and help her find an apartment. And then we found she wasn't a great person. She was in a very difficult situation and responding as best she could. But we were mad for a while, but then no regrets. And then 3 weeks later, a month later, we were contacted by Tiffany. And Yvette, had the first contact with Tiffany. And they talked for an hour. And it was as if Yvette says, I wish she lived down the street. And then I called her and we had a great conversation. And then we agreed to go to Asheville for a match meeting. And that's an important step because once you match with someone, you get taken out of circulation and you can't be considered by other birth families and they can't consider other people. So it's like, going steady. And we went down there to Asheville, North Carolina, and we were going to meet her at 10:30 for breakfast or something with her mom. And it's like 10 o'clock and 10:30, and she was going to tell us where to meet, and we're not getting a phone call, and we're like, okay. And, we'd had many conversations with her beforehand and felt really good about it, but we're there. We're like, have we been stood up? Like, what's going on? And she finally calls at 11 o'clock or 11:15 and says, you have to meet me at the hospital. I'm having the baby today.
Whoa.
And so we drive to the hospital and she's there with her mom. And of course, we haven't seen a picture of her actually. It occurred to us. She knows what we look like. She's like, hi. We're like, oh, Tiffany. And they go in to the hospital and Logan, our son, was born 3 hours later. My wife was in the delivery room with him. I was walking around like the expectant father outside.
Wow.
And then we stayed in Asheville for 2 weeks. In North Carolina, and every state is different, there's a period of time in which a birth mom can change her mind. And you never want to take that away, right? As scary as it seems. And we just made the choice that we would try to be in touch with her. So we sent some flowers, we called her. In the beginning, she didn't want to talk to us. In fact, the day she was discharged, it was a very emotional day because the second day, and she was fine. There were no issues with the birth, but and we kind of hung out in the birthing room, where the birth mom's resting, and they bring the baby in, and so he was in there with us. So we were all kind of there. Actually, only one of us could really be in the room at the time, and then one of us would be back in the hotel because it's not a huge room. But on the second day, when she was going to be discharged from the hospital and we were going to take Logan back to our hotel, we walk in and she wasn't making eye contact with us. And my wife is by nature a very sort of holds herself back, doesn't push her own agenda, is very solicitous of other people's feelings. And she's like, oh, we should give her some space. And I look at Yvette and I go, no, go talk to her. And I pushed her into the room and closed the door.
Sorry.
And they started talking. That's gonna make me cry because Tiffany just was like, I just don't know. Like, I don't want him to hate me. Like, I don't want you to feel negative about me. That's like, we're terrified that you're changing your mind. And she's like, no, I love you guys. And so, yeah, so we went through that. We got through that. And then we met her other kids. She had a 10-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. And we just kind of hung out. We weren't overbearing, but we got in contact with them and everything for the next 2 weeks. And so then we left. We went back to LA. And then we've stayed in touch with them ever since. We're friends on Facebook and all that stuff. And so, yeah, so that's been, but back to your question about, the whole racial thing, is we were just open to it. And it's not like I had any naivete, but I just was ignorant. I didn't know. Like, I knew we'd have issues, but I didn't know what those issues were. I remember Logan was 6 months old, and someone asked us, they go, well, how do you handle the whole racial thing? And I'm, a smart ass. And I said, oh, we wear black masks, like half the time. Like, we were told to help socialize the child. So I have an Eddie Murphy mask, and my wife has like an Oprah mask. And so, we're like, hi, baby Logan. And the woman's like, and my wife just slaps me, and she's like, they don't know you're joking. I go, okay, no, we don't wear black masks. But I said, someone asked me, like, how are you going to teach him to be a black man? And I go, well, I'm not. Like, I don't have any idea what that is. I can maybe teach him what I think it means to be a man and all of those things, but he's going to have to handle the blackness on his own. And I think for the most part, that's true. Like, as parents, you can be open to that and be able to see with really clear eyes, like, wow, what is white supremacy culture? How do you bring forward images and stories and books and shows and, encourage relationships with other friends and all of that. But, we have no illusions that our kid is probably going to face as much stigma from black people as white people, because he's an Oreo. Like, he doesn't talk like a black, like, he just doesn't, it's just, so he's going to have to go through that process. And our job is just to support him however we can and make sure he has whatever skills he needs. But it does make you wake the fuck up as to what's really going on in this country. I have read way more books and listened to way more podcasts and been concerned about many more issues than I would have ever, I think, had we had white kids. It's just the reality of it.
So this is all fascinating, which leads me to wonder, with your second child, was the situation the same, or was there any, because you already had an African-American child, was that part of the scenario or no?
Yeah. Well, actually, the story of Joshua is really a story about following charm, right? Which is a phrase that we're all familiar with. I started teaching. I got back from India. This is a few years after we adopted Logan. So I got back from India from training and started teaching. And I went to Minneapolis to teach a course and came back. And I didn't have anything to do for a week. And I decided to go on a bike ride. I'm a cyclist. So I got on a bike ride. I ride across the Golden Gate Bridge. I ride up into the headlands. And then I stopped looking back over the city, beautiful view. And I was hungry. And every fiber of my being wanted to go to something that had opened while I was in India called the Rafa Cycle Cafe. Rafa is a upscale British cyclewear brand, and I own way too much of their stuff. And my wife was always terrified when I would go to the store to kind of hang out. I'm just going to go have coffee. She's like, oh God, you're going to come back with a jersey or a jacket or something. and so every fiber of my being wants to go check this place out. But then I hear this little voice, and again, it's not like a it's not like a literal voice in someone else's voice, but this impulse just said, go to Sausalito. And I was like, okay, so I'll go down to Sausalito. So I rode the other way, and I rode down the backside of the hills and went to Sausalito, and I go to this cafe that I really like called Chibo. And I'm walking up and laying my bike against the thing, and I see this African-American child, maybe about 3 years old, with these beautiful dreads. and this woman who I guess was his mom and then her white friend sitting at an outdoor table. And I just walk up and I go, "Hi, this might be a weird question, but do you use any product in your son's hair? Because I have an African-American child and he used to have these beautiful dreads, but we shaved them off because they smelled bad." Because one of the things when you're white and you have black kids, basically every black person you meet, well, a good percentage of them will give you advice on what to do with their hair, like what products to put in it and how to twist it. And so, but we'd put all these things in, beeswax and all this stuff. And then he'd stick his head in dirt, and they were horrible. They looked good, but they smelled terrible. So we shaved them all off. And so I went up and said, "Do you use any product? Because I have an African-American child and we're thinking of relocking his hair." And she looks at me and she goes, "I know you." And I'm like, "What?" She goes, "Well, I don't know you, but I saw you." She goes, 3 weeks ago, you were at the taco truck night at Larkspur Landing, a sort of outdoor dining area near the ferry building in Larkspur." And I'm like, "Oh," and I do have a memory of seeing them there, right? But I didn't interact with them or anything. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, we were there. We sometimes go, into Marin in the summer when it's warm, because it's not warm in the city. It's often warmer on the other side of the bridge." And so we chatted for a little bit about, just stuff. And I talked to her son, Jeremiah, for a little while. And then I'm really, really hungry because I hadn't eaten anything. I'm like, "Well, Jessica, it's really nice to meet you. Ryan, the other woman, and Jeremiah." Said, "But now I'm going to go get some food." So I go in to get some food, and I got my tray, and I'm looking down at my food, thinking, where should I go sit? And this very strong impulse says, "Go talk to them." And I'm like, "You're a very pushy person anyway. You were already talking to them. You don't want to bother them, but not go talk to them." So I go back out and I make some lame story about, "Do you mind if I sit with you? It's just lovely to be here in the sun." I'm already fried because I've been riding in the sun without sunscreen, because I never put sunscreen on. My wife puts sunscreen all over the house just by power of proximity. She thinks that I'll maybe see it and put it on, but I never do. And so they go, "Yeah, sit down." And now we start talking about adoption specifically. And I said, "Yeah, our son was adopted, and obviously his name's Logan. He's this old. He's a little older than her son, Jeremiah, and or a couple years older than Jeremiah." And so, and Jessica's sitting down, right? So she's at the table, and she's kind of heavy set. And so she's either fat or pregnant, but I'm not going to ask because I'm not a small child. And she looks at me and she says, "Well, I'm 8 months pregnant and considering placing the baby for adoption." And I was like, "Oh." And so we all just got this really sort of tingly feeling. And I'm like, "Well, here's the number for our adoption agency or the website." I said, "You should go." But, I said, "But they have lots of families. You should just go and see what you feel like." And then we hugged and said goodbye. We agreed that we would have Yvette and Logan come. Jeremiah was having a third birthday party in a couple days or the next weekend, and maybe we should all get together. And she drives off. And I called my wife and I said, "I think I met our birth mom." And she goes, "Where?" And I go, on my bike ride." And she goes, "She was riding a bike?" I go, "She was riding a bike." And so 3 weeks later, Joshua was born. And I was in the delivery room that time. And so, yeah, that's how. And what's really fascinating is after he was born and she was out of the hospital, a few weeks after, she actually said, "When I saw you in Larkspur that day, I said to my friend Ryan, that's the family I want to place the baby with."
Huh.
But she did not know how to approach us. I mean, how do you break that ice? Walk up, "Hey, I noticed you got a black kid. You want another one? I can pick that up for you." Right?
Yeah.
How does that work? And she just said, "If I ever see them again, I'm going to have to say something." And then when I walk up, of course, I have no associative memory of them. It was triggered when she said it, but they were like, "That's the guy." Like, they were like, "Holy shit." And then when I went in to get food, they're like, "Oh my God, what do we do? Like, do we just wait here? But what if he goes out the back door? Well, one of us should go in." And then, of course, I came back out, and that was just it. So that was Joshua.
Wow.
So,
Amazing.
yeah. So I say when you have one black kid, it's just sort of like, well, you could just get another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's a beautiful story of flow.
Yeah.
Just being in the moment and
Yeah.
and being in touch with your feelings and not letting the intellect or the ego get in the way.
Yeah, just go to Sausalito.
You just
Like-
go to Sausalito.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Go to Sausalito. Go talk to them. Go. Yeah.
And how old are your boys now?
14 and 9.
Wow.
Fabulous.
Hey, Joshua. Come here for a sec. I was telling a story about you. Come here. Say hi to people. I don't know if you guys can hear because I'm going to unplug my. So Joshua. This is Joshua.
Hi, Joshua.
I was telling
Hi,
the story
Josh.
about how I met Jessica, your birth mom. And it's a beautiful story. So, all right, you're done now. Go. Close the door, Josh. Gently.
What do you need from a black man?
Oh yeah, one of the upsides of adopting African American children and being white is they play the race card all the time. Like Josh was playing Minecraft with his buddy, and I'm trying to do some work on it, and he's just screaming at him about like, no, don't use that pickaxe and don't use those blocks. And I go, Josh, you got to go down to the basement. He goes, always putting a black man in the basement. Or they're like, like, can you guys clean your room? Racism. Like, no, it's not racism. It's just parenting.
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so happy that we're having this conversation because, I mean, we talked a little bit last year when things were in America were blowing up or whatnot. And I think I definitely, in my mind, made assumptions of how your adoption or how your children came into your life. And none of the scenarios that I made up were anything like what you talked about.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so I feel like, if anything, if no one ever had that conversation with you and maybe just out in public sees you and your wife with 2 African-American children, there's all of these things that come up. And I say only because I watched an episode with Whatsherface. She's married to Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, and her mother have a show. And they were talking about this woman who had adopted African-American children and all this stuff and all these things that were going on. And it wasn't until after they started to have a conversation about it that it was like, oh, I never considered that, or oh, I never thought about this. And the beauty of the story that you just described, I don't think anybody would ever imagine, just by looking, that that's the way that could have happened. Yeah. But we create all these scenarios. We'll go, why does he have 2? Why is why are they boys? Yeah. What you know what I mean? Like all these things.
Does he have a massive savior complex? Or, I mean, all of that. Yeah, you can't tell. And I have met people who have said like, oh, I've always wanted to adopt a black child because I just thought, it's a way of, I just want to help however I can. And I'm like, yeah, you're just trying to serve your own ego. Like that's not like that's. I mean, that's that idea. Like we didn't do this to be good people. Like we didn't. I have no illusions that we saved them, that we did none of that. Like, I mean, yeah, none of those feelings. And I think in a weird way, like it's maybe why, like we have really good relationships with the birth families, and I think it's because we all just feel comfortable. Like we don't have any judgment of them, and we're not threatened by them. Someone says, "Ooh, aren't you worried that that your son will want to go live with his birth family or run away?" I go, "Well, he can't. He's like 14. Like, we'll bring him back." Like, and again, that's the thing about open adoption is that it's obviously open adoption is better for the kids. It's you can see how it's better for birth moms because they get to make this very empowered choice. Like their choice was to choose us. It's a very empowering thing for a birth mom to do. But unrecognized is often the benefit it gives to birth families, because adopted parents, because we never have to worry of the day our sons will come to us and go, I want to meet my real mom.
Right.
Because like, oh, well, you just were on the phone with her like a couple weeks ago. And the other thing about, back to your initial sort of question, Rory, about navigating this black-white sort of thing, is that, we get vibed on sometimes by Black people. I mean, in fact, Joshua's adoption was challenged. The guy who was named as the birth father, who had nothing to do with her during her pregnancy and, was dismissive of her on social media and all of that, but his mom and aunt were like, that is just wrong for white people to raise Black kids. And they asserted a claim. They fought the adoption in court, and we had to spend Joshua owes us like $35,000. It's on his bill, in legal fees. He's gonna have to pay that back. And he, we had to fight them, and they basically, were, it was just, that's their feeling. And the lawyer in me is like, I prefer to be judged on the basis of the content of my character, not the color of my skin, or fitness to, throwing Martin Luther King quotes back at him in court briefs. And as it turns out, he wasn't even the father. Like, they did a paternity test, and because that's one thing you do, and it's like, oh no, you're just someone she slept with. You're not the dad.
Wow.
And so, so the downside of that is we don't know who his father was. The upside is we know it's not that guy. So we would sometimes get vibed on by mostly Black men of a certain age. Usually when we'd see other African American people, they'd be like, "Oh, your kids," because the kids are adorable, and then they want to make sure we're doing the right thing with their hair, and so we get. But every once in a while, you'd get some an askance glance from somebody, and you just go, "Hey, I didn't see your name on the list." Birth mom picked us. Like, it's permission.
Do your children meditate?
Joshua does more. Logan did. They both learned. Logan went through a phase where he did, but now he's like, nothing I do is of interest to him. So, he's just like, but he knows how. Joshua's very, Joshua made a YouTube video. He did a Zoom meditation class, like an imaginary Zoom meditation class. And he has this sense of like having an audience. So he's done little YouTube videos. We don't put them on YouTube because we don't want him to get any. But he's he did one on how to draw a flower, like a 26-minute video on how to draw a flower. Wow. And he's like, okay, guys, you might want to pause the video here because, this part's on. And they go like, oh, you're back. Oh, that's a good job. Good. I see. He has a really natural sense of an audience. And so he was doing this Zoom meditation class. And he's like, and now we just want to say our mantra very slowly and very softly. And then 14 seconds later, okay, well, that was good. And then he says, does anyone have any questions about meditation? Because that's a question I always ask. And then he went through this thing like, oh, yes, Christopher. And then he's listening and he goes, wait, can you say that again? Like, he's imagining not understanding and then like, oh, that makes sense. And then he answers the question. Okay, guys, I'll see you next week. He's just like, he's a total performer.
Wow.
He's going to go a long way.
Yeah. Our kids are very different from each other. And Joshua, the youngest, is a very sort of high energy, very volatile, creative. If you know chemistry, I describe my kids in terms of chemistry. Like, Logan is a base. If you add Logan to any situation, it becomes more stable. He's very grounded, very grounding. Joshua's a reagent. If you add Joshua to any situation, volatility spikes, crazy shit becomes possible. Joshua came up the other day, 6:15 in the morning, and he said, okay, I smelled the smoke, and so I turned the stove off. And we're like, what? And he's like, well, I was making popcorn like you said, so I put the oil in the pan, and I turned it up to high. And we're like, no, you don't just make popcorn by yourself when you're 8 in the morning. Like, no.
Got it.
So yeah, it's hard to defend against Joshua because he has no natural. You have no idea what he's going to do. Like, if you've ever played sports, you're like, oh, does that guy favor his left hand or right? Is it a fake and then a shot, or does he settle? Like, you kind of have a game plan and you can defend. Like, Josh is so random. Like, you cannot defend it. It's like, you have no idea what he's going to do. So, anyway, yeah, we're talking about my kids a lot. They're very interesting.
I don't have kids. I don't.
Oh, I can tell. Look at that well-rested face.
I don't plan on having children.
Uh,
And that doesn't mean I won't. The thing that I have considered is like fostering, almost
Yeah.
like a catch and release program to see if I actually like
yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly.
But I've heard so many people say, "Oh, that's one of the hardest things to do is to give them back and all these kinds of things
Yeah.
and stuff like that." But
Yeah.
I mean, I love hearing stories, especially teachers who have children. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
their challenges or all
Yeah.
the things that comes along with it. So thank
I
you.
think.
For sharing
I think the question was, do your kids meditate? I think they see us modeling the behavior. They have the skill. Um, I I think they'll have the ability to tune into it whenever they want or need.
Well, I just another thought that I had is like, oh, all four of you sitting around meditating and like and that giving you some advantage in going out in the real world and all of the stuff that comes at you for whatever reason,
Yeah.
being better positioned to handle it all.
Well, I think we're all better positioned because my wife and I meditate. I know it helps us, and if it helps us, it helps them. That's one of the things. I don't know if you guys have found this, but when people are, learning to meditate and working to make it a habit, and they have their motivations and reasons, I have found a lot of people, and I think women tend towards this more than men, but not exclusively women. They'll think of meditation as something they're doing for themselves. My wife was that way. She thought of it as like a spiritual pedicure. And the problem with that, and I discourage that kind of motivation or that kind of framing, because I said a lot of women tend to not be really good at doing things for themselves. And there's a certain guilt associated with that. And if women are moms, then they feel like they have to give everything to their kids. And if they're working moms, then they feel even more guilty that they're not giving as much to their kids. And so if it's framed that way, and so I try to get people to see, no, you're doing this for your kids. This is not for you. This is, what do your kids need of you more than, wholesome meals and to be on time to soccer practice. Your kids need you to be the best version of you. Right? That's it. That's what your kids need, And so if you see this as something you're doing for you, you're liable to have a certain amount of guilt, because if you do something for you and you have this ethos of sacrificing for others, for your spouse or for your kids, then I don't think that's the way to go into meditation. But the truth is, we're doing it for everyone. What does the world need of us? To be the most balanced, responsive, adaptable version of us.
Okay, thanks for sticking around to the end. This season, we are looking to engage with you, our audience, and would love to know what topics and themes would be of interest to you. Also, who would you like to see as our guests? Perhaps you might be interested in coming on the show and talking with us. We would love to have you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us using a direct message on our Instagram. And for those of you who are not camera shy, feel free to share a video with the hashtag The Vedic Conversation. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and if you found value in this episode, please share it with your audience and consider giving us a positive review to help others